All right, so you finished your beautiful Indian focal, and that part's all done. So now it's time. We finished our choker, and so now it's time for us to talk about the cowboy connector. Now, the cowboy connector was a piece that you're supposed to design on your own, based on the tools you have or don't have, or whatever you wanted to do. Not everyone is going to have a repoussé die, so that's why we had the option to modify the daisy concho, which I'm going to show you first before we get into too much stamping. This daisy concho. This is a 22 millimeter daisy concho that you can get from the supplier on the supply list if you may already have one. And you can leave it like it is for the center of the pendant. You don't have to cut the middle of it out. You can just solder it onto a back plate and then saw around it, which I'll show you soon. But I'm going to show you how to take out the center and put a bezel cup like this in the center. Bezel cup. It's a gallery bezel cup. This was actually on your supply list as an optional item if you choose to do the daisy concho 10 millimeters and a 10 millimeter stone flat back to cab. And you can put those in the middle and make the daisy concho. So now I'm going to show you how to modify this. So there's lots of ways to modify this concho. You can hold it in your hand and saw it, which I've done in the past. You can put it inside of a ring clamp if you've got one of these. Let me back out here so you can see what I got. It's a ring clamp holder. You can put it in one of these and stick a pin in the back and hold on to it. You know, whatever works for you. Just be careful you don't hurt your fingers. And I would put it vertically and then lube up your blade and just start sawing. And all you're doing, get as low as you can get it. It'll save you some filing in the end. You could probably also hold this in your miter jig if you don't have a ring clamp holder. I didn't put this on the supply list because it's kind of a basic thing that a lot of people have. You might have a different, you can put it in a vise, I suppose. You just don't want to crush it. When you get right down to the end, you can kind of just peel it out, okay? So then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to file the inside and make it nice and flat, because the top of it will be a little lumpy and uneven because it's a little hard to get it perfect. So you can just take a flat file and go over the top of it until it looks nice. And you might want to take a file around the inside as well. Just make sure you're not filing low enough to hit your little beads. Just keep the file on the top of the piece and get yourself a nice rim there, and it'll start looking really nice. And if you need to go back in on the inside, you can use a half round or a round file and just go in there and clean up. Okay? And once you get it the way you like it, check your bezel cup to make sure it fits inside. And then I'll show you how to create a back plate for it and solder everything together and solder a bezel cup in there. Okay, but that's really all there is to it. Just make sure you take some time. You can even take a Timo tip inside of here and clean it out. Just to make sure it looks really pretty, okay? You don't want anything to be junky and trashy. The procedure for attaching these conchos, all three conchos, to a back plate is pretty much the same. You want to file them down, get a nice little lip on the back, and we are going to sweat solder them onto a piece of 20 gauge sheet. And it's really important that you get a nice tight connection, and that's where the filing comes in. So the procedure again is the same for all of them. We're going to first fill the insides with easy solder. You can use chips or you can use easy solder paste. It's up to you, but they would both work very, very well. And then we'll sweat solder them on to the 20 gauge backing. want to be pretty generous because I want a lot of solder to flow out and give me a really good join. All right, I'm going to remove this. You don't want to do this on your charcoal block because if you do, it'll get too hot, okay? Add some flux, and we're going to start trying to warm this up. You also, this is a stamping that is very thin, so you don't want to put your torch directly on there. You just kind of graze over it a little bit, back and forth, and don't get your torch too close, or you will melt your little thing here. And we're just going to move around the outside of it. The solder's already kind of starting to flow in there. It doesn't have to melt completely, just want it to kind of attach to the back, okay? There we go. So now it's kind of melted inside there. And I'm going to get back my little piece of silver square that I had. A little piece of scrap. And I'm going to get that hot. I'll put some flux on it. On both pieces. I'm going to turn this upside down on here. And then I'm going to actually put this on top of a couple of clips so I can kind of get up underneath my piece with the heat, because that would be important also to heat from both sides, under and over. Bring this a little closer to the side here. I'm going to rotate a little bit just to try to get that heat underneath all the different sides. One more little bit of flux. You just want the solder kind of flows where the heat goes, so you want to kind of you want the solder to pull down from the back of that piece you just, the concho, you want it to pull down onto the silver square. And since I have the heat underneath here, hopefully it will pull down. I'm going to come back up on top and hit it a little bit. Trying not to actually touch the stamping too much. And I think I see some of the solder start to come around the outside a little bit, so that's good. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm just going to check it, make sure I got a seam all the way around. There's no gaps or anything. Looks like I do. And now I'm going to add my bezel cup right in the center. Great. So, well, it's still hot with some flux, and then I'll just place some flat chips. You want to make sure that they're flat. That way your bezel cup will not be lumpy. It'll sit down in there. I'd say like 4 little pieces should do it. Once again, you could be using solder paste for this if you prefer. All right, get my bezel cup. What did I just do with that? Here we go. I'm also going to dip my bezel cup in a little bit of flux, and then I'll place it right on top. Okay, and now I'm going to do the same thing I just did before by heating from underneath. I'll put a little bit more flux on there.
The gallery wire on these bezel cups will melt super easy, so try not to
to get your flame on there for more than just a second or two, or that it will melt. The solder isn't going to flow until all that flux is burned off, so you kind of are safe. You know nothing's going to melt until that happens. If it's still white powder coat, then you know that your flux is not melted yet, and neither will your silver be melting. And you definitely don't want to put heat directly on this little center stamping for too long, because it will melt. Kind of going to go around it now. Here we go. Okay, and it's on, and we are done. We're going to quench and pickle. Alright, so at this point, I'm just going to saw out around the edges. If you want to leave a little bit of decoration, you can leave a little extra space, or you can saw right up to the ends of the scallops there. It's up to you. Just remember to leave a little bit of room, because you have to file the edges So sawing out your piece for these little conchos is pretty much the same. I'm not going to film me sawing out every single one, but I did want you to see the process, how I'm just kind of going around the borders. Now if you have a piece that's stamped, which you'll see later on in this video, it's the same thing. You just saw around the stampings. But you do want to leave a little bit of space there so that you have enough room to file out any imperfections and make everything nice and even when you're done. So this is kind of what you'll end up with. The best file to clean these up with is a barrette file. It has no teeth on the back, it's pointed, and on the front it has the teeth. You want to go around and just level out all the edges and clean up in between the cracks. Now if you'd like to go over it with a Timo tip or a pumice wheel at the end just to make sure all the file marks are out, that's great. Sand the back really well, and we'll attach jump rings to the back of this one. For the back part of the daisy concho, I just used two 14 gauge jump rings that I cut myself and soldered onto the back. Jump rings need to be really thick, so I'm using 14 gauge wire, and I'm wrapping them around pliers to make a coil. You want both of them to be the same size, both of your jump rings. And now I'm just going to pop them off one at a time. If you go slow like this, you're not going to cut yourself. There's one. Two. Sideways, and you can also put them in a miter jig and saw them, but sometimes I find that to be more cumbersome. It's up to you. Alright, so squeeze them together with some pliers until they form a circle. Give them a little tap, okay, just so that they're a little bit hard. Work hard, okay? And not too much. You don't want them to turn square on you. And the next thing you want to do is you want to file the backs. Now you can hold them in a pair of pliers or whatever works best for you with the slit towards the pliers. Okay, you want the slit to be inside of your pliers, and then you want to file off a You want to make a nice and square piece on the bottom so that when you sit it on your metal to solder, it's flat, okay? You can go either way you like here. Just make sure you don't take off too much, but it's got to be flat. And that way when you set it up on your piece to solder it, it won't roll off. I realize this isn't a concho, I'm just using this as an example, but you would draw a line down the back of your concho and set your jump rings as close to the end as you can get them, but they should not be visible from the front of the piece. And put one on each end, and then you would just simply solder them on with some easy solder. I would lay a piece of easy solder on either side, or you could use solder paste if you want. And when you heat up these kinds of things, just like we did over there with the other pieces, don't touch the wire with your flame, okay? Just keep heating the back plate, heating the back plate, heating the back plate, and then dust over the wire and everything should get on there. But make sure you get a really good join and a really good connection, and you'll be just fine. So that's how you do the jump rings on the back. You do have to use a really super thick gauge wire, because if you use a thin one, it'll snap when you try to open it. So these are really super thick, and this way too you won't need to solder them, because it'll take pliers to open and close them. They won't open and close on their own because you used 14 gauge wire, okay? So that's how you do it with the two jump rings on the back. And this is what they would look like attached. And once you get these on here, they are permanent. You wouldn't want to keep opening and closing them and taking the concho off, because your connectors could break. So these would be permanent. You don't need to solder them though, because they are 14 gauge and they're very thick and can only be closed with pliers.